Welcome to How to Love Your Heretic. And sitting in with me today from sunny Arizona is my daughter, Payton.
Hi.
Who's wearing a New Mexico shirt, and I don't know why.
I got it from Cousin Gracie.
Well, that's a reason. Hello to Cousin Gracie. So, let's start with something a little bit stark. A 16-year-old ballerina is asked to strip in front of a doctor. But this is not your normal doctor's appointment, because she's there with her sister and her mother and hundreds of other people. And it's 1940s Germany. Well, scratch that, Auschwitz. And at that appointment, Dr. Mengele asks her if her mother, who's standing with her, is her sister or her mother, and she doesn't know how to answer that, and she answers with the truth. And the truth sentences her mother to death. And a woman who's now in her 90s, Dr. Edith Egger, still says that that decision haunts her. Many years later, that ballerina of Auschwitz is sitting in a room as a renowned therapist. And the government, which she works with on occasion, has scheduled an appointment for her with a Branch Davidian, somebody from the David Koresh compound who's going through some trauma. And sitting across from this man, he lets her know, not knowing that she's Jewish, not knowing that she has a tattoo on her arm, not knowing that she's an Auschwitz survivor. This man goes on for a bit of a rant on how he hates blacks and Jews. And when he takes a breath, and there's an uncomfortable pause, Dr. Eggers says, "Tell me more." Now, you might say somebody who's triggered, as Dr. Eggers is, by something as simple as a cobblestone road, triggered, and memories rush back from the trauma she herself went through and thousands of others in the Holocaust. You might say that that wasn't a response that you would give to somebody who was expressing something as ugly as anti-Semitism. Maybe if it were me, I would have started by showing him my tattoo or giving him a lecture. But Dr. Eggers knew something that Jesus taught, that if we're truly here to heal others, or at least to aid in the healing of others, and if we're truly here to see after the well-being of others, if we are truly here as God's hands and feet, then some sacrifice might be required and forbearance. So Dr. Eggers, like Daryl Davis, who we talked about last week, put aside her dignity for a moment, put aside her own self, and in a truly selfless moment, did probably the hardest thing she could do at that moment, and that is to listen. To listen to an ignorance that had cost her the life of her mother when it proceeded down a path that was mixed with power. At some point, she'd have a breakthrough with this person because she exhibited love and forbearance. She's not a Christian woman, but she's expressing what Christians call the fruit of the Spirit, the harvest of the Spirit, in a number of ways, in humility and in forbearance and love, true love, unconditional love, which is kind of a divine love, mystical love that allows us to love not just the true, the beautiful, and the good, but it allows us to love the despicable, the unworthy, the ugly. And in that moment, or in the many that are to follow, in that struggle, that love, in the cocoon of suffering and love and empathy, something beautiful can come out. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The show's called How to Love Your Heretic. We've been talking about heretics and apostates. And those aren't words I like. I don't know. I put it in the title just to catch your attention. But we've been talking about Aaron Rodgers and Rhett and Link and people who have left the faith, which that no one argues over the definition. That's called an apostate. And it sounds scary and it sounds maybe mean. I don't think they refer to themselves as apostates, but people within a faith tradition refer to people who leave a faith tradition as apostates. And so the definition, kind of hits the target. But what about heretic? How do we define a heretic? Well, what I've found about the topic of heresy is a heretic is usually somebody who thinks differently than we do. Right? We never self-proclaim our own heresy, but a heretic, Luther was a heretic to most of the church when he led the Reformation. And I'm sure I'm a heretic to most of the fundamentalists and evangelicals who come across this show. But a heretic ultimately is somebody who's disagreeing with the fundamentals of the Christian faith, but it's the fundamentals as we write them, right? So we might disagree over baptism. I might think that baptism is a spirit baptism, or I might think that it's represented by a sprinkle over a baby. But if I don't immerse the baby, or if I do immerse the baby, I could be a heretic, right? Or if I only believe adults should be baptized to the people who immerse babies, I'm a heretic. And so you see, that's kind of a relative term. So How to Love Your Heretic is going to be, I don't know, a half hour here of me telling you how people actually make things worse with people who are going through a faith crisis, or who people, they don't call it a faith crisis, they call it a pursuit of truth. And so a lot of this has to do with reality and perception. And so I want to share some things to you that I've learned from Dr. Egger and Daryl Davis and Keith Giles, and just my own journey. Philip Yancey and others, a lot of wonderful people you could read about this kind of thing who've been through it. Randall Rouser, I could give you a list on a future show, people you might want to consider, but I'm just going to give you a few tips of what to do if you want to ruin your relationship and turn a heretic and help a heretic become an apostate, or what you can do to be a friend, to be a loving neighbor as prescribed by Jesus, or to be somebody on the path of life who people will look to, even if they disagree with it, and say, wow, I'm glad he's in my life. I'm glad she's in my life. Because I know we disagree, but they love me anyway, right? So Rhett and Link just recently shared that they are no longer evangelical Christians. And of course, it elicited a great response. And some of it was very loving and encouraging from both believers and unbelievers. And some of it, mostly from believers, was really, I would call it evil and wicked and rude, as people try and justify and sanctify their rage, their wrath, and their insecurities. So let's talk about that for a second. As expressed by Daryl Davis and Dr. Eggers, what you want to start with if you're in a situation where you have a son or a brother or a mother who's going through changes, and in their pursuit of the truth, they are straying from the reservation and may be asking difficult questions and coming to in your perception, awkward conclusions or stunning conclusions. What you should do is to start with love, right? This is what the Bible says. If the Bible is your authority, I hope your authority isn't a book. I hope your authority is Jesus Christ. If you call yourself a Christian, if you call yourself a follower of Christ, but even if you're not, even if you're an agnostic or some other faith tradition, I don't think you ever err by starting with love. I think as a fundamental agent of transformation and healing, love is a requirement. So how do we start with love? Love requires somebody and prepares somebody to have the capacity to listen and to be a good listener. And that's what allowed Dr. Eggers to forego all probably the responses she could have chosen, Terminator style, right? A, tell him to F off. B, kill him. C, she forewent all the responses that the average person might have expressed to say, well, tell me more. How do you do that? Is that less than or more than? Well, I'm going to argue it's more than. I'm going to argue that is the kind of temperament we need to love somebody out of their ignorance or their hatred. No, I'm not saying somebody who's leaving the Christian faith is ignorant or hate-filled. If you've heard me talk about Aaron Rodgers and Rhett and Link, I'm saying exactly the opposite of that. But I'm saying they're similar. These are similar events that you might find yourself in. And if you are trying to love your heretic, you start with love and listen. And when people are asked, when apostates, people who've left the faith, are asked, what are the main reasons you've left the faith? And some people say, the hypocrites in the church. And some people say the science denial. The church is, not built on reality. They want us to reject everything, we learn that's true in the natural world. And for some, it's a stringent sexual ethic that they find is bigoted. All kinds of reasons. But the top reasons that always show up, no matter what poll you look at, whether it's Pew or Gallup in the secular world, or whether it's Barna or Lifeway in the Christian world, no matter what polls you look at, the top responses for people leaving the faith is that they say, in a negative sense, that within the faith, they didn't find the space or the room within the faith to ask sincere questions, to express doubt or incredulity even. Now, the funny thing is, if you read the Psalms and if you read the scriptures, New Testament or the Psalms, you're going to find a lot of incredulity. You're going to find a lot of doubt expressed. You're going to find people not only who doubted, but who argued with God. And these are some of God's best friends. These are some of the heroes of the faith that argued with him over his character, over their understanding of his character and his message. Now, you don't find that in evangelical circles anymore. When you find people asking those hard questions or sounding like Moses or Jacob wrestled with God. Moses, Job challenged God. David is filled with challenges on God's character and so forth. And I could go on and on about the prophets and others. But you don't find that in evangelical circles. You find if you ask the wrong questions, or I would say the right questions, sincere questions, that you are shunned for it. And that you are characterized as a person who has weak faith or who lacks faith, right? You're not celebrated for it. So I'd say the first thing that's required is listening. I want to show you a clip now. This is from 2017. This is a BioLogos panel. BioLogos is a group that seeks to bring science and faith together. So you can live your faith without denying, modern science in any way. And they have a panel of their employees talking about what they've been through, mostly in evangelical circles, by being scientists, but also being faithful Christians. I'm going to share this short clip with you. It's about a minute long from David Buller, who was at this conference in 2017.
I have a friend of mine who went to the same church. He was the brother-in-law of a pastor. He and I were kind of the two people in church who absolutely loved science. And while my path took me through college, seminary, and now working at BioLogos, this friend of mine is now an atheist. And a few years ago, I sent him a message and just kind of asked him about, we had such kind of similar starting points and just wondering how we ended up in such a different ending point. And it was the same sort of thing, curiosity, that he mentioned, that he felt that in churches, sometimes he remembers even from a young age, asking some kind of skeptical question about something he was being told and being really discouraged from doing that. And he saw the exact opposite in the scientific world. Being curious, asking questions is rewarded. From his experience, Christianity discouraged curiosity and question asking, whereas you can't do science without curiosity and question asking. So this same kind of curiosity that can fuel both communities and should fuel both communities was something that ended up being kind of a wedge between the two. But I think it's such a potential for common ground too, because talking even sometimes with secular scientists as well, it strikes me so much that curiosity still is such a point of common ground. And at the same time, I've thought many times that one of the things that would be most unsatisfying to me about materialism or atheism would not be that it asked too many questions, but that it doesn't ask enough questions. It asks questions only to get to the threshold of the most interesting and important questions of all, and either says that those questions are nonsense or that they can only be answered if you're going to do it through science. And I think perhaps one way of kind of bridging and reaching out to those people that have had their curiosity push them away from the faith is not to argue against their science, but to try to push the science as far as it can go and see what questions science can pose that point beyond science. And I think for me, that's what led me from wanting to be a research scientist to wanting to do some kind of work in this science and faith dialogue. It's that curiosity is still with me. It's changed the way I think of many things from how I grew up, but it's really led me to see how richly rewarding it can be to work and think about and pray about how we can fit the two together.
So that was David Buller expressing a story about a friend he grew up with who wasn't given room to ask questions. And when he gets to university, he finds out that's the scientific method. That's how truth is wrestled with and eventually found in pretty much every other area of life. And there's a sense of grit and realness to it that is missing in the fantasy land that he grew up in of his religious faith. Now, I'm not saying that about all Christianity. That's peculiar maybe of Western Christianity in America that has so much rooted in the fundamentalism and certainty of fundamentalism. But the ability to ask questions, the freedom that you're given to ask questions. Remember, it starts with love. One of the things that I love about John Lennox and Dr. Jerry Root, who's head of evangelism at Wheaton College, they both say the same things. They say when they meet somebody, they rarely offer anything about themselves. They mostly just ask questions. John Lennox has like a rule to live by, and if he meets somebody anywhere, he will ask them a series of questions about themselves, and he'll ask questions until they ask him one. And I think that's what Daryl Davis does. I believe that's what Dr. Eagers does when she says, "Tell me more, Dr. Eager." So here you have something that's tangible that you could start doing today. And it's not just with people who you disagree with. It could be with anyone. And it shows that you have an interest in them. It also builds the muscle of listening, because especially in our social media day, we want to give information, we want to give advice, we want to give opinions, and we live in a world that's just overflowing with this kind of a hubris, this kind of like demand of attention, and it does seem cold. And a lot of people find that Christians aren't good listeners, and to be honest with you, we're not. We like to tell people what we think and how we think they should live. And if they don't think and live that way, then we pull out the H word, the heretic word. But I think we could take a lesson from the people who really do this well. The Ravi Zacharias, the John Lennox, the Francis Collins, and others. Is the asking of questions is not just wise in the Socrates and Jesus way, but it's loving. it's a loving way to communicate not only truth, but wisdom and interest. And so you have to legitimately be interested in your neighbor. If you're not legitimately interested in your neighbor, you can't love them, right? You just can't. It's a show. And so a lot of Christianity is viewed as a show. The second thing, Rhett and Link were talking recently. So the second thing, start with love, and it takes humility and forbearance. So the fruit of the Spirit. Second thing with how to deal with your heretic. Rhett and Link were talking, they were unpacking their deconstruction testimonies the other day. And Rhett said one of the things that he really makes him cringe is when people express pity toward what he's just said. Mostly Christians responding to their confession that they've left the faith, look at it as like a death. And I'm going to get to that because there is a grieving process, but they look at it like you just said, oh, your mom died. And so they say, oh, we're so sorry for you. And so they're treated with pity, as if they're sad and they're dejected and they're not actually elated that they feel liberated. You see, to the heretic, the person you view as a heretic, they don't view it that way. They view it as, I mentioned that the two standard reasons for leaving the faith were one, they not having any room to ask questions. But the second thing is when people are asked directly, why did you leave? What made you leave the faith? What prompted it? The majority answer is we were pursuing truth. We were pursuing the truth, and we found what we had to not be true. So whether that's true or not, whether they were pursuing the truth and they're in some error now, isn't the question. The question is their motivation. And their motivation was to pursue the truth. We should honor that, right? So they're looking at this as somebody who's escaped from Plato's cave, and they're in the sunlight now. And they're celebrating. They're on the beach. They're not scared of shadows anymore. The fear is gone. The shame is gone. The guilt is gone. They see themselves as having graduated to a higher plane, not slid down a slippery slope. And so when you come to that party and you say, oh, I feel so bad for you, you're insulting them. So the second way to love your heretic is to not pity them. So how do you do this? I mean, if you want to put these two things together, there's this wonderful study, and some of it is just books, street smarts, and some of it actually has science behind it. But there's this wonderful study about how to have certain conversations, and men, for some reason, do this well. I'm not saying women don't, but men, for some reason, have this kind of built into our wiring. So the science shows, and that is a conversation that you have face-to-face with a man is different than a conversation that you have sitting next to somebody, and you're not looking straight into their eyes, but you're sitting next to them. And awkward conversations between men are often better had side by side. And this was true of me as a young man. When I would do something I felt bad about, or do something I needed to talk to my father about, I'd say, Dad, do you want to go for a drive? And we'd sit in the car, and I wouldn't have to look at him in eye to eye. And it freed me to be able to tell more of the truth. It freed me to be I didn't feel as judged or on the witness stand. And so a lot of times men do this at a bar, like the bar behind me. They sidle up next to each other at a bar and nurse a drink together, and they talk about deep things and struggles or what have you. And more comes out than when you're facing face to face, like you're in an interview for a job. And so this kind of relatable thing, it sounds like something strange, but it's true of prayer too. If you're in certain physical positions for prayer, somehow it seems not like God can hear you better, but you feel more inclined, more ready, more capable of pouring your heart out. If you are on your knees with your head bowed, as opposed to like, the publican and the sinner, right? So oftentimes, if you're having a difficult conversation with somebody, if you're sitting side by side and you're in a car, or you're you're in a booth at a restaurant, or you're at a bar with a friend, it's easier to have those conversations. So when you're dealing with your heretic, it might be easily.
I'm gonna empty my pencil.
Okay, Peyton's going to empty her pencil sharpener. Think of it in this way. Think of being alongside them. Come alongside them and listen. So now you're coming alongside them and listening. You're a companion. You're not a therapist, right? You notice how therapists don't confront you either that way anymore. But you're a companion. You're not putting the person on trial. You're not opposed to the person physically or mentally. And so you're a companion, and you're taking it in and walk with them. And the asking of questions allows you to walk with them, and they'll appreciate it. And they will bear their heart more, and they'll bear their soul, and try not to interrupt. And so this is where the death comes in and the grief comes in. Oftentimes when we hear a person leaves the faith, we are sad because we feel like we're losing a brother. And there should be a sense of grief when our little brother walks into the far country, right? But we shouldn't stay in the field with the older brother saying, what a loser. He's frittering away dad's inheritance. The feeling we have should prompt us to pack our own bag and go after him, because we are our brother's keeper. And when we go after him, we're going to be walking next to him if we really want to have an effect with him. As a matter of fact, Luke 15 has Jesus surrounded by sinners. He wasn't standing on the corner with the righteous until he went to rebuke them for their hard heart by telling them the story of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. So gently rebuke them. So I think when we express pity to them, when we say, I feel so sorry for you, they see themselves as having broken free of the plantation. They're a freed slave now. And all of a sudden we show up on their porch in Canada where they're feeling an amazing feeling they haven't had before. And we say, we're sorry that you're not back on the plantation in chains and in agony. So they see it as a liberation. They see it, right? What they call their deconversion or whatever. They see it as deprogramming. They see themselves having escaped a cult, and now they've broadened their horizons, and they don't see narrowly anymore, and everything is more real to them and more special. And they're actually more in touch with the true, the good, and the beautiful. This is where they are, to let you know that. So when you come in and you act all of a sudden like something, like they've lost a limb. No, you've lost a limb. They haven't lost a limb. They feel alive, and they feel that they're pursuing the truth. And they actually might feel they're ahead on the path, further up the path than you are. So you might want to catch up to them and just listen. Just say, tell me more. As Dr. Egger said to that anti-Semitic racist. So tell me more. Love first, tell me more second. Be alongside with them as a companion. It doesn't mean your faith is weak. It means your faith is strong. It's the strong person that can come alongside somebody who disagrees with them and not have to interrupt them, not have to correct them, and listen with a loving heart, right? All right, so they see themselves as having gone through the process of being a grub and going into a cocoon, or for the sake of this, a caterpillar. Their life in Plato's cave was as a caterpillar. And they spent a while in a cocoon, and this is their deconversion, right? Where they went through all the pain and the grief and the suffering and the loss of knowing that if they choose truth, if they make the choice to choose truth, it's going to cost them. It's going to come with a cost. And they may lose relationships, and they may lose the comfort of certainty, and they may lose, family and friends and job opportunities and all kinds of things. But there are some people in the world who really put a value on truth to such an extent that they're willing to say, let truth rain, though the heavens may fall. And the heavens may fall if they're surrounded by people who care more about their dogma than they do about their son or their sister or their father or their friend, right? And that really kind of separates the people who truly love from the people who only love you because you think like they do. So they see themselves as becoming the butterfly, and here you show up and you're calling them a grub. This is what separates people, and this is why they don't want to be around you. And this is why they don't want to have conversations with you anymore, because all you are doing is bringing a pity party to their confirmation, to their graduation, right? To their wedding, to a point in time where they're telling you they feel free and alive and excited and rejuvenated and full of joy. And you come as the wet blanket and say, I feel so sorry for you. So try and restrain your pity and maybe harness that. I'm not saying you don't have to feel sorry, but maybe harness that in a way that comes alongside them. You know, in grief counseling, when somebody does lose a loved one, sometimes the worst thing you could do is talk. When you come into the presence of somebody who's just lost their mother or has just lost their wife of 40 years, right? And you try and say things. There's no words. There is no incantation that could take away the pain, and there shouldn't be. It's a lifelong love that has to be processed. There needs to be grief. There needs to be mourning. Join in the mourning with them. Sit and shiva with them for 40 days or 40 years if you need to, and just let them cry. Just be there. I have a friend who's a grief counselor, Chain, and he says people miss so much in times of grief counseling, how important it is just to be a compassionate presence there for them, just to be compassionately present in their lives. And this is what you need to do with your so-called heretic, whether they're going to go through a phase and then they're going to realize that Christianity is bigger than the fundamentalism or the Catholicism or the Calvinism that they grew up in. And they realize that Christianity is kind of like ice cream in that way. You know, if I hate, Payton knows I hate coconut. And if I never was introduced to ice cream, but the first person who gave me ice cream gave me coconut ice cream, and I tasted it, would only take one taste before I walked away or threw it out. And then if somebody approached me and said, do you like ice cream? I would have said, no, it's wretched. I hate ice cream. But then if I, walked into the creamistry in downtown Gilbert and found out that there's many different flavors of ice cream, my favorite, if you go to the creamistry, Captain Crunch, the Captain's ice cream. It's filled with Captain Crunch cereal. It's amazing. But anyway, if they gave me Captain Crunch cereal, there's nothing better, right? Some people, it's Rocky Road, but you realize Christianity is like that. It's got different tribes, and some of those tribes are really ugly and distasteful, and they taste like gravel in your mouth, or worse, dirt or dung. That's just true. I'm just being honest. There are flavors of Christianity or tribes of Christianity that are wretched because Jesus is locked outside. Revelation 3, Jesus said this himself. They're bearing the Lord's name in vain, right? There's just no love there. There's no room for Jesus in the church. So there's room for all these other things. And, some people tasted that ice cream and they say it's wretched. And they make the mistake of saying all of Christianity is wretched. They don't realize that there's these divisions and maybe different grades, different gradations of truth. Some are closer to the truth and closer to the love of God and closer to the representative blessing of Jesus than others are. Jesus is the fullness of the Godhead bodily. So the closer you are to Jesus, not Leviticus, right? Not the Old Testament prophets who'd use the sword to kill their enemies, but Jesus who said, love your enemies. See, that's the difference. There's a big difference there between people who are trying to conquer and crush their enemies and people who are trying to, Conquer their enemies with the love of Jesus. There's a big difference there. All right. Some are trying to combat those people. Some are trying to love them. And so some will be a blessing and some will be a curse. And some will bring glory to the cause of Christ and some won't. They'll bring shame to it. So grief counseling, oftentimes we need to walk with them and sit with them side by side, not face to face, and listen until they finally ask you a question. And then if they get there, if they actually ask you a question, be careful how you answer it. I'm going to close with this one episode, very sad in the time of my time as a pastor in Illinois, but a girl who I love, who's going through recovery for some things, she brought a friend who's in recovery. And this girl was going to a recovery for gender disorder. She had dysphoria, and she felt she was multiple people. So her preferred pronouns were they and them. Yeah, so she came to our church and she sat there for 2 weeks. And she came up to me afterwards and she expressed such joy. She said, I love it here. I feel such a connection. I love your messages. I was speaking about the love of God and the love of Christ. And then I never saw her again. And I finally asked my friend, I said, what happened to so-and-so? You know, she came for 2 weeks. She seemed to be connecting with the people here and she seemed to really love it. And then she just disappeared. And her friend said, well, she asked how you felt or what the church thought about, you know, homosexuality or transgenderism. And she said, I told her, and then she just didn't seem interested in coming anymore. And that was such a burden on my heart, and it tore my heart out, because I thought to myself, and you know, maybe her friend answered truthfully, maybe it was inevitable, but the truth is that position is, if that's an obstacle, set it aside. I'm still wrestling with those issues and they're not critical to the gospel. And maybe we can talk about those issues further down the line, but I have that Rachel Held Evans view of the church that, you know, we're not to be building walls, but breaking them down and throwing the doors open and saying, listen, I don't care what you've heard about the church. It's not a fortress. It's a festival. It's a feast. And my doors are open to you, and we welcome you to come as you are. We've got bread and wine. Let's sit and talk about Jesus. So I hope that's how I communicate the faith from here forward. But there's a lot more to loving your heretic and talking about what pushes people into apostasy. Oftentimes, it's the people closest to the person that push him away. You see that in the life of Aaron Rodgers. His family and his church have pushed him into a position where he thinks he must accept, which is this kind of what Rhett called the hopeful agnosticism. And it's so unnecessary. And quite frankly, it's so unbiblical. It's not true to the scriptures. It's not true to the person of Christ. It's not even true to church tradition. It's true maybe to the last couple hundred years in the Western church in America. And so we need to examine ourselves and say, what are we putting up as an obstacle to the faith and not a bridge to it? What obstruction are we placing in front of the cross and empty tomb and the filled throne that quite frankly is a distraction and is less than? All right, that's all I've got to say for today, Pay. Do you have something you want to share?
Yes.
Oh, I love your artwork. And this, it looks like you've captured, can I say what I think this is?
Yeah.
It looks like you've captured my butterfly metaphor, right? There's a beautiful butterfly right here. And it looks like you've got the tree. So there was a caterpillar and a cocoon. Am I right?
There's the caterpillar on a leaf eating, and then there's the caterpillar cocoon, and then there's a pretty butterfly.
Well, you've captured my message in a picture. Do you want to sign off with anything?
Hello.
We love you, folks. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.